order the Apache Junction work session for February 3rd, 2025 to order, and ask everyone to put their cell phones on silence. Roll call, please.
Mayor Wilson,
Here.
Vice Mayor Schroeder.
Present.
Councilmember Cross,
Here.
Councilmember Heck,
Here.
Councilmember Johnson,
Here.
Councilmember Nesser,
Present.
Councilmember Soller.
Here.
You have a quorum, Your Honor.
Thank you. And welcome, Councilman Johnson. Presentation.
Thank you.
Presentation and discussion of code restrictions for feeding the pigeons. Eli.
Good evening, Mayor, City Council. Acting on your direction, I've done some research in the past month and a half on the feeding of pigeons on private property. Initially, we thought this may be, birds in general, but looking over other cities' code and just, what's happening in the state, it really does boil down to pigeons specifically. They're the target here of what we need to consider. So here, I just wanted to show a little bit about what other cities are doing. So highlighted in blue, doesn't show up very well on the screen, but highlighted in blue are the cities that are our comparator organizations. So I'll just list them out since it's a little difficult to see. That's Avondale, Buckeye, Casa Grande, Goodyear, Marana, Maricopa, Oro Valley, Queen Creek, and Mesa. So of those comparator organizations, only Mesa has a prohibition on pigeon feeding within their city code. So it's not a common ordinance in the Phoenix metropolitan area, and where it is seen as more of those very heavily urbanized cities. But as one of our comparator organizations did have a code provision prohibiting pigeon feeding in backyards, I was able to reach out to their office and ask them a few questions. And this is their provision adopted in 2019. It was part of a larger effort to target nuisances within the city, including other topics like watercraft parking, recreational vehicles. The primary message that Mesa's code enforcement office shared with us is that this has been very difficult to enforce. They've had one successful case that made it to court and a resolution since the adoption in 2019. And we heard similar feedback as we talked to city attorney and our code enforcement team, that as feeding normally occurs in backyards of residences, this is something that operationally might be a real challenge to get that evidence required to enforce this kind of code. It's one interesting thing to note is that many people in Apache Junction and the Phoenix Metropolitan are kind of protected from the potential damage that pigeons could cause, as this is often addressed in HOA covenants. So that is an option out there that kind of takes away this concern for many people. But that pretty much wraps up this kind of initial look at this topic and what other municipalities around the metropolitan are doing. And we're happy to take any questions at this time, act on any further direction you may have, and see where you'd like to take it as a council.
Okay. Yes?
How many complaints have we had in our city regarding somebody else feeding pigeons and they're pooping all over the place?
That's a great question. In recent memory, only this one that we've heard from Mr. Kitzman, who's brought it to our attention.
Okay.
Yes?
So Eli, I think did you say that Mesa has a very difficult time enforcing?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. So both Mesa and Phoenix, who I failed to mention, they also adopted this very similar ordinance in 2019. Both Mesa and Phoenix have had one case in each city that they've been able to successfully enforce this.
One out of each of those cities.
Correct.
Okay. All right.
Anyone over here? No? I'm going to make a quick little comment on this in the aspect that as a one of the questions that I have is, and the aspect is, how do you, I'm going to say, make a difference between a pigeon and any other bird in the aspect on this? How do they pinpoint that you're feeding pigeons, or pigeons just happen to be in the neighborhood?
Yeah. I feel like, yeah, that's a good question, a little outside of my expertise, I guess, but I do know, as I reviewed the city codes of these different municipalities, that pigeons were called out by name in each of them that prohibited it, and there was frequent mentions of like one permissible way to feed birds in general are specific devices that prevent pigeons from accessing the food. So those should be, I don't know, things that like hang from a ceiling, maybe the weight of a certain kind of bird would prevent the, so I don't know the exact answer to that. That's something I could look into, but I do know that pigeons specifically are what most of these municipalities are trying to prevent.
And then the other question.
Your Honor,
Oh, yes.
I'm really confused as to could enforce anything that decides which bird out of the sky is going to come down. One thing, I can't see how that would ever truly be enforceable.
Councilmember Johnson, could you repeat that? We were having some trouble with the audio here.
Okay, I do not understand how any city could realistically feel that they could justify and identify which bird out of the sky decides to pick up a little piece of seed from somebody's bird feeder.
Yeah. I do have a comment on that, Councilmember Johnson, Mayor. At Mesa's code enforcement team, when I talked to them, they said that, this is important to them, having this code, even though it's, very difficult, they rely on voluntary compliance, essentially, and educating the public against pigeons, and the damages that they cause specifically. But yeah, it is something that there's a lot of sentiment from staff that this is very difficult to enforce, and the operational inefficiencies could be challenging and undesirable.
Your Honor,
Yes.
I could see this being an issue with City Park. You see the movies year or time after time, somebody in this, we'll use New York City as an example, somebody sitting on a park bench throwing down lots of breadcrumbs, and hundreds of pigeons come flying down, and what a mess they leave behind. It's not just the food they eat, it's what they leave behind that makes a horrible mess. I could see an ordinance like this helping to prevent that, especially in our bigger cities. But I don't think we have that issue here with somebody constantly feeding. I mean, in trailer park that was by my house had an elderly lady that fed the birds every morning. And it was a combination of quail, pigeons, and dove. And, there was probably 50 pigeons sitting on the wire every morning as I go to work. There they are waiting, and here she comes out, feeds them, and there's right there where the power line is, great big nasty mess. But she finally passed away from old age, and we haven't had any pigeon issues since. Quit feeding them,
Your Honor,
Yes.
how much time did you spend on this research for this?
Too much.
Not extensive, to be honest. I would say less than a day. The ability to kind of look at each city's code and search, pigeon feeding, narrow down what the cities are doing, talk to Mesa's code enforcement team. Victor was able to connect me with them. So I would say that 3 or 4 hours for the majority of it. Waiting on emails, that's not an active kind of effort.
Well, I apologize.
Yes.
Your Honor, the only comment I have on it is, I agree with what I was going to say was what Darrell just said is, if we had any ordinance, it should be against anyone purposely going and feeding pigeons at a park, at their own house, or any place, specifically feeding pigeons.
Yeah.
Otherwise, just put a sign up that says, pigeons not welcome.
I feel like I should mention in regards to those comments that So I was kind of specifically focusing on residential property, but it is more common for cities to have code that prohibits the feeding of any animals on like city property, parks, public property. So just in relation to your comments that, and I have the list here of cities that prohibit that, kind of a separate conversation, I guess, but something that is more common.
And the final one that I wanted to bring up, wow,
It's tuning,
Yeah.
tuning his guitar.
I turned it off, turned it back on. I forgot what I was going to say because of that. One of the things that we experience so many times is when we go feed grain to our horses, we will get pigeons, all kinds of birds coming in wanting to pick up the droppings that the horses decide that because they don't chew with their mouths closed, they chew them with open and they distribute it over the entire area where they're eating. And it is, sometimes it's, I'm saying done, especially in the rural part of the community, done in this way, not necessarily as a direct feeding of the birds, but it is something that the birds will hang around. In fact, I've seen many a time that you'll have quail or pigeons on the back of a horse waiting for them to start eating so that they can join in too. And I have one horse that I'm going to say kind of enjoys to have company in his feeder with a pigeon or a quail in the feeder as well. With him, he doesn't bother him at all. And, he'll get there and eat. Basically, in a sense, he's spreading it out and letting the pigeon have some of the stuff that he's eating. So, I mean, it's going to be very hard to, are you purposely feeding or are they part of your feeding program of other birds, whether it's chickens, because we have chickens too, and we'll get a bunch of birds that come in and join in with the chickens as well. And it becomes a problem for trying to get them out of the cage for chickens, but they come in and they try taking over. So I think one of the things we need to look at is if we do implement this or look into it for implementing, is having something that says, incidental is not, considered a crime in the aspect on it, whereas, because this does happen, and it's something that we all have animals understand.
Your Honor,
Yes. Yes.
I would just like to put on record that I feel that of all the things that the council and the departments have to research and put their time into, that maybe just public education is a little bit better than having a law where people have to decide whether they're going to criminally feed birds or whether we can simply educate people that feeding birds will allow them to leave residue. Please use common sense.
Your
Yes.
I would like to see an ordinance for city property and city parks, if we're gonna do it. No feeding of any wildlife in any city park or on any city property. I could tell you, I know in Mesa, we had a lady feeding skunks in a neighborhood. And that's actually against the law by, I believe, Game and Fish. Yeah. And all of a sudden, there's 50 skunks in a neighborhood, and people were not happy. But
Your Honor.
go ahead.
Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead, sir.
I was just going to say, well, what metric do we measure at what point we define the problem? So if we're talking once every 10 years, when do you want us to come back for direction? Because right now, I'm not sensing there's any push to do anything on the city council further, other than to know that this could be something you want to bring back if it becomes a problem. But from a city staff standpoint, we're not defining this as a problem in the city.
Your Honor,
Yes.
on a legal standpoint, if it's a neighbor overfeeding and making a nuisance for his fellow neighbor, Is it a civil thing between two neighbors, and they can hash it out in small claims, or what?
Mr. Mayor, Mr. Cross, yes, that would be a civil matter. There was a discussion that it could be an HOA matter. Well, that's for new subdivisions, but if it's an old neighborhood, they probably don't have an HOA rule that does that. I prosecuted a case in 2013. It wasn't feeding pigeons. It was more like shooting pigeons and killing them because they were on the wall because someone didn't like the droppings they were leaving. And they were caught red-handed. So that was a successful case, but it wasn't feeding pigeons. So feeding pigeons in this case, I mean, you go to a grocery store or a hay store, you see the cubes that they sell, and those are now, you know, $20 or whatever it is. People have those, and I don't know, are you gonna, hopefully, you're not gonna prohibit the grocery store or provider to have those. I don't know if that would be a good idea, but, because that's the supply for the food. That's one way to do it. But to answer your question, yes, that is a civil matter, and they could go to small claims. Just have common sense. Respect your neighbors.
Okay. Your Honor?
Yes?
My opinion that.
Your Honor.
Go wait a minute.
Hang on, Bambi.
Your Honor.
Wait a minute.
Any ordinance of any kind involving feeding or not feeding a bird is textbook government overreach and has no place here. Go ahead, Bambi.
Bambi?
My view on this is, do we really want to have code compliance and police officers utilizing their time by going after people that put out bird seed?
Sure we do.
Chief Pulley's shaking his head, yes.
He's got a lot of
He's
other
excited,
issues.
he's excited about it, so.
City Park don't feed any wild animals, no birds, no animals, nothing.
I would agree with that. I don't think that we need to spend time creating a policy or a code that's gonna address something that really, unfortunately for the one individual, isn't really an issue that has the magnitude of requiring our effort. So I would agree that we just leave this go, and maybe revisit in 5 years if we, if it looks like there's any change in this.
Okay, any other discussion? Okay, thank you. Presentation discussion of case number P24-1-AM. Nicholas.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good evening, City Council. I'm Nick Leftwich, planner for the City of Apache Junction Development Services Department, and I will be presenting the case P24-1-AM, a text amendment to the Apache Junction Zoning Ordinance, Article 1.5, Zoning Bulk and Use Regulations. So to provide a refresher on the background of this case, work on the amendment started on December 5th, 2023, when the City Council held a discussion about the use of conditional use permits for major lasting, impactful land use decisions. It was noted at the time that some land use changes made through conditional use permits, which are only approved by the Planning and Zoning Commission, were just as permanent and significant in impact as formal rezonings, which require City Council overview and approval due to the long-term effects in shaping the city. So staff were directed to research what's done with conditional use permits, what other cities do, what different text methods we could implement in the code that would involve City Council overview and oversight into some of these land use decisions. Following which, on January 16, 2024, staff presented options based on the research that we conducted, and were directed by the City Council at that time to draft a text amendment, specifically in this case to modify the zoning ordinance land use tables as a way of creating a stepped criteria, or a stepped, some conditional use permits would still be basic Planning and Zoning Commission overview, and then for the more high impact, significant impact, permanent impact decisions, the City Council could get involved in that. And so we have spent time drafting and doing research on this in order to provide that draft for you. So at the center of this text amendment are the conditional use permits themselves. And so the first step in evaluating the conditional use permits as a tool and for the procedure itself was to review again the definition of it. So straight out of the zoning ordinance, conditional uses are defined as those uses that are generally compatible with the land uses permitted by right in a zoning district, but which require individual planning and zoning commission review and conditional use permit approval of their location, design, operation, and configuration, along with the imposition of conditions in order to ensure the appropriateness of the use at a particular location. So just making sure really that a use that is similar to other uses within that land use category, if it has any kind of special impact like noise or odor, that by conditions imposed by the Planning and Zoning Commission or the City Council upon appeal, we would manage the operation of that and make sure that it didn't become a public nuisance. And again, the uses that require a conditional use permit are those identified in tables 5-1 and 5-3. So, following the direction determined by the City Council, we found that the best way to involve the City Council itself in these high-impact land use decisions was to evaluate this whole land use table with criteria that I will just get into, and to determine which categories necessitated City Council overview and authority, and to integrate that into the table. So,
Nick, I'm sorry. So, council's direction to veer any CUP that has anything to do with our general plan to come to council instead of planning and zoning, this was a catalyst for you to crack this thing wide open and start changing a bunch of stuff?
Mayor Wilson, Vice Mayor Schroeder, we tried to, although there are changes throughout the table, we tried to limit the scope to these categories that I'll review. There are things that we found are ultimately just better served as a rezoning. And so some of the changes, some categories were modified because of by definition, that zoning district was not appropriate for that zoning use. And we did that specifically to find what uses or what land use changes are to be made by the council. It's like if something doesn't fit within the definition of the zoning ordinance and someone wants to operate it, is that just going to be administrative? Is it going to be planning and zoning commission? Or is it going to be city council? And if it's something that ultimately is different from the definition of the zoning ordinance, we believe that should require rezoning, go to the city council, and because of that, some of these land use categories have changed.
So geographically, you couldn't just say, well, this particular project falls in our general plan area, it goes to council. Not that black and white, not that simple.
I don't necessarily have a direct answer for the general plan since it isn't integrated into the code the way that the ordinances themselves are. Since the general plan is, while it is a guiding policy, it doesn't carry any legal weight in terms of changing it in the code. So the criteria that we found, at least when we presented to the council, was to, I guess, come up with a way to determine what uses would be city council approved, what uses would be just planning and zoning commission approved. So.
Right, so that would be anything within our general plan that would affect our general plan, which was voter approved, would have to come to council. I mean,
Yes.
That's basically the only criteria we had for it, right? I mean, if you want to put up a bingo A-frame tent in front of your, condominium of complex, go to the P&Z. So, or, there are degrees. So I'll let you continue. I'm sorry, I'm just curious.
Thank you. Thank you for your question. So, to establish, we went through the land use table and we had three major criteria under which we evaluated what categories maybe needed to be adjusted, what categories needed city council oversight and authority, that you would be either, as elected officials, the ones making a sensitive decision. Especially, again, when it comes to things like general plan changes or changing the characteristics of a property. But to get into the specific criteria, the first criteria, number one, is getting back to the definition of conditional use permit. Is this land use conditional? Again, is it one of those things that has to do with these impacts like odor, noise, operation? Or is it something that is actually conditional in the sense that there's some aspect of operation that requires management and can be revoked for failing to meet those standards. We see things like outdoor music is something that has traditionally been handled through a conditional use permit because you might have a bar, and a bar, of course, is just a pretty standard use. And then you have a bar with outdoor music, and that outdoor music may be a nuisance to the neighborhood, and that's something that has been managed through conditional use permits because upon revocation of that conditional use permit, that impact could be mitigated. So that's one of those examples of something that could be revoked. Some of those don't necessarily need city council approval. But we see that also because there are some examples of non-conditional uses that we were using conditional use permits for. For example, when we have a residential development in a commercial zone, and they go to city council because the way it's currently written in the code is that you only need a conditional use permit. If they go to the Planning and Zoning Commission, get a conditional use permit, that conditional use permit's functionally not going to go away because of noise or we found it as just impractical that a conditional use permit for an apartment complex would be revoked when that is there. And characteristically, it's going to be very hard to change multifamily on commercial. And we saw that, as was noted, that's a significant land use change and doesn't necessarily fit within the definition of conditional or conditional use permits in general. So that was a criteria that we went through the entire table trying to ascertain what land uses are conditional, what land uses are currently being used with conditional use permits but are non-conditional. And that is the first item that we noted. The second evaluation criteria is what land use, is this land use of such high or significant impact that the decision would be best made by our elected leadership, by the city council. To define high and significant impact, high impact would be land uses that generate exceptional levels of activity or disturbance. Again, although conditional use permits that are in the overview of the Planning and Zoning Commission review things such as noise and traffic, you might have a very major source of noise and traffic, like an amusement park. An airport certainly would be something that, the way that the code is written right now is that if an airport came in, it would just go to the Planning and Zoning Commission. And that is something that everyone in the community would have an opinion over. And I'm sure that as elected leadership, you would like to be a part of that decision. And so though it is that kind of lens that we reviewed the table for high impact, while on the other hand, there are items of significant impact that maybe no one notices in terms of seeing something and some people do, but when you have things like jails, I guess that would be a pretty visible one, but that is something that maybe you're not hearing the prisoners, but it'd be sensitive to the community. That is something of significant impact to people within the community that they would know and say, and they would raise a concern to the city council of whether or not they want that in an area. And that would be a decision that we found would be best beholden to our publicly elected leadership. The third criteria was one that I mentioned, and it's one that more of these miscellaneous items fall under, is this land use better served with a rezoning or a planned development? These are the changes that weren't necessarily done through conditional use permit, but were rather changing the category where, for example, when we see multifamily in the B1 and B2 commercial zones, those are designated strictly for commercial within their actual defined definition. But traditionally, the zoning ordinance has allowed multifamily within them by conditional use permit. And that's something that would just be better served to change it to another zone, something that the zoning ordinance actually says this is where multifamily goes. A side example for things like planned developments, shopping malls, which are, of course, obviously commercial in nature. It's not that they wouldn't go in a commercial zone, but they need a little bit more integrated planning across a large area. Something that's a little bit more involved than just a conditional use permit that goes to the Planning and Zoning Commission. And so some of those things would be better served by going through the city council, by going through a more invested planning process. So with these three criteria in mind, the staff has updated, we've drafted an update to the Apache Junction City Code, Volume 2, the zoning ordinance, the Article 1.5 zoning bulk and use regulations, land use tables. The actual way that this integration was incorporated into the code was by creating a footnote 9, and I apologize, I found in the red lines that somewhere between my printed draft and the printed draft that ended up on the council packet, some of the footnote numbers in the red line document specifically disappeared. That will be corrected. Just a minor printing error. But anyway, the way that this code text was integrated into the code was through the addition of footnote 9. Noted land uses shall be subject to a city council review and approval through a public hearing following a recommendation by the Planning and Zoning Commission, or through actually changing a category within the table so as to facilitate the process of a rezoning or require a rezoning. And as another side note, the symbology of the table has been updated to facilitate ease in reading, as opposed to just saying like yes, yes, no, yes, and having a word in every single one of them. What happened is, as we reviewed pretty much all of the zoning ordinances across the valley and in our comparator cities, we found that most of them used this type of symbology that just noted what was permitted. If it wasn't noted as permitted, it was just a no use by given. And we found that that was, in our experience, a lot easier to read. And we found that this was at least a time to make that. So with this, we presented to the Planning and Zoning Commission on January 14th, and they voted 7-0 to recommend the approval of this draft text amendment to the City Council. As things are currently scheduled, there is a City Council public hearing scheduled for February 18th in just a couple weeks. And with that, I am happy to answer any questions that you have for me tonight.
Questions?
Hundreds.
Go ahead.
On your red lines, we'll start with an easy one. For each of your tables that you have, we'll start with residential use regulations. Page 1. The very top, you have it in the kind of a gray bar, and it gives each of the zoning districts. And then you go to the next page, and they're all gone. Can we make sure, not only here, but in all of our documents, that gray bar continues on the next page so you don't have to scroll back and forth, back and forth? Make sense?
Yes.
Yeah. I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
And then, seeing how we're on residential, the accessory dwelling units. Does the state prevent us from having any kind of conditions, or this has an administrative use permit? Are those supposed to be, for the ordinances that were passed last year from the state of Arizona, are those supposed to be more readily available or readily administered without having to go through special permits or not?
The administrative use permit in this case is just when they come in for the building permit, and it just goes through like a check, a review internally. They don't.
It's not a separate special fee.
No, they're not paying anything right now.
Who else?
Others? You got it?
It had been a question before, if there was. In my experience, I've been here about 6 years now. And that was a question I personally had, is if it's a $25 fee for administrative use permits in general. And I asked, do we apply that to accessory dwelling units? And the answer has always been no for me. So, but for administrative use permits in general, that had been the case.
Any questions over here?
Yeah, I've got another one.
Okay.
On, let's see, page 4 of the commercial portion of the tables. Trade schools and administrative services. We went from requiring a cup to now it's just a permit for the city center.
That was
What's the thinking behind having a trade school? Is that to cover the CAC then?
Yeah, that was something that we found in practice. I recall, I personally had a conversation when these zoning tables were changed in 2021. And at the time, I recall that there was a conversation that we figured that maybe it was going to be, if someone was going to try to buy the Grand Hotel site and put like EVIT there, which big fan of EVIT, but in terms of figuring out what was going to go on the downtown, we wanted, the commercial land uses. And then in my practice as practicing as a planner in this profession, that question actually came up where someone just wanted a trade school within an office center, and they said, "Hey, why are we being treated any different?" And when they were just filling in a suite in a building, and that was an excellent question. And so, although that one is not necessarily within one of these categories, that was a change that we found appropriate to make because there was no, when it actually was tried in planning practice, we did not find a good reason for that conditional use permit.
Okay. Next page, on page 5, the amusement parks. Wouldn't we want to try and consider having amusement parks in our industrial area and away from the residences so that it didn't become an issue?
That is a change we can make. We didn't change the underlying zoning of it,
Right.
but ultimately, we figured the most important thing was that these amusement parks would go to the city council. In terms of changing where they are located, that is, if you would like us to make that revision, we will do so, if that's agreed upon. I understand that location of amusement parks is critical.
Sure. And I think the last one I have is on page 7. So contractor's office, shops, storage, indoors and outdoors. You went from permitted in a B5 industrial to a conditional use permit. Isn't that the whole purpose of having an industrial zone, so that, having to go through a conditional use permit wouldn't be necessary? It's permitted by right. You expect to have a contractor's office in that location.
Now, what you bring up is an excellent point, and the reason why it was changed was actually to recalibrate it with the existing footnote number 4, which wasn't something I drew attention to in anything, but the existing footnote number 4 is kind of odd. This is how it is written. It says, land uses listed in the B4 and B5 district that propose outdoor assembly, repair, manufacturing, processing, and/or storage shall require conditional use permit approval, even if identified in Table 5.3 as permitted use by right. So we, in terms of assessing everything within these sections, everything within this table, we found that footnote was more of the oddity, where there's a footnote that says, even if it says, yes, it's permitted by right, you still need to get a conditional use permit, and it just made more sense to say it needed a conditional use permit if a footnote elsewhere in the table says you're going to get one anyway, even if we say you don't. Kind of that specific change was to make those match, so as to not have that ambiguity, that question, that discrepancy there.
Okay.
So why not just get rid of the footnote?
As a policy decision, if you would like to, we can, but that part was something that we often come across. Just in the question of outdoor manufacturing, outdoor yards. Right now, it affects a lot of things. So specifically changing where those outdoor operations could be beyond that. I think it deserves attention, but we just were seeking to rectify the contradiction.
Yes,
Your
Bambi.
Honor.
Yes, Bambi.
Is on that particular area, is that because of with that outdoor manufacturing, you might have excessive noise, smells, or whatever if it's beyond times?
Your Honor, Councilmember Johnson, I believe that is the reason. At least the reason why it was integrated into the code. This part at least dates to 2014, so that's my understanding of it.
Okay, and then further down, under transportation and warehousing, postal courier and delivery service. You know, we're not gonna allow any kind of, UPS store in our downtown core district, so we're not gonna allow a UPS store. Isn't Fry's in the downtown zone?
Yes.
That doesn't make sense. That's one that we could have, you know, right there at the old A.J. Bayless Shopping Center. Heck, we may even want one right next to our hotel if we ever get one.
They may have them in the hotel.
You know, I think having it to where we not allowed to have a postal courier or, you know, that type of a,
Says permitted, though.
no, I'm talking for the downtown center, the city center, B3.
On page 7, we
It's
we
not allowed.
changed, in this case, they were all noted with a conditional use permit. That was one that was evaluated of why does this even have a conditional use permit? And so the change that we did make is everything that said it needs a conditional use permit, we modified to be permitted.
Right.
But we didn't change the B3 zone, which currently prohibited it. We just left that alone.
Well, I just see the red line there, that's why.
Right. And
But they could change it.
that is something that is under your purview to change. I recall that the idea in 2021, we kind of, whether or not every single category was sorted correctly, I guess is up to your judgment. But back then, the idea in 2021 was some uses are like the kind of retail shopping that attract people downtown, and then pretty widely swept uses that weren't considered that kind of commercial draw were just taken out of the downtown. So if that was a little too sweeping, that may be so, but that we leave that to your purview.
Yeah, I tend to think that is a little on the sweeping side. I would love to have a UPS store in our downtown core. Right now, it sucks having to drive all the way to Gold Canyon to drop off my Amazon returns. Just saying.
Understood. Thank you.
We'll fix that.
That's basically all I had for.
Anyone else?
A lot of work.
Okay.
Thank you.
We'll see you in the next meeting.
Thank you very
Thank you.
much.
Okay, presentation, discussion of award to bid for Prospector Park drainage improvements. Dave?
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Dave Butler, Park Superintendent for the Parks and Recreation Department. And I'm here tonight to go over the Prospector Park Drainage Revision Project with you. So some of you might remember that we went out for bid in late 2024 for the drainage project itself. All of those bids came back and were almost double what we had originally budgeted for the project. So getting those bids back, we went back to our engineering and design team and tried to value engineer the project to where we could reduce that cost and see what changes we could make to the plans and the overall project to get back to where our original budget number was. After we had those changes to the plans done and kind of changed the scope of the project a little bit, we went back out for bid on January 4th and received 4 new bids that are much more in line with what we had originally budgeted for the project. To go over the project a little bit with you, you can see this red cloud area on this map here is the drainage channel that we currently have at Prospector Park. Runs right in between the softball fields and the soccer fields, and that kind of collects the flow from everything from the north in that empty desert area and is intended to route it around the softball complex there. 2 things that I do want to kind of point out on this picture, and I don't know if you can see where this mouse is. This sort of triangular area here is, I'm going to call it a retention. It's not actually a retention. And you'll be able to see in the next slide some of the work that our parks team has done in-house to this area to regrade and clean this area out to allow water to come in and flow better. And then one of the other things that we've also done in-house in this area is on this north access road, we have had curbing installed down this entire north access road and all the way down this west parking lot. And this is a great picture because you can kind of see right here where that water would come down from the desert and just kind of sweep across and carry everything with it. Because prior to this, there was no curbing anywhere at Prospector Park. So adding curbing to both this access road and this parking lot is one of the things that we thought that would help us be able to direct and control the flow of that water a little bit better. So you can see in this picture here that all the work that the team has gone in there to dig out that, again, we're going to call it a retention, even though it's not really a retention, to make it flow better. The two things on this slide are that there's these two red areas. So when we went back to our design team, we were really trying to find a way to make the project work that was at a reasonable cost. These two red areas are included in a base bid, and the yellow is what we call an add alternate, where it's an option if we decided to go do all three of these crossings. The real issue here is that these are existing crossings over the wash that are technically undersized for the amount of flow that we get in there. So in meeting with our design team and going through the whole project, we really feel that the issue is that these are too small for the current flow rate in there, and that is why we made those part of the base bid. This north crossing, the water comes through there just fine. We don't have flow problems in that area, and we didn't see the need for the ultimate goal of the project to keep water out of the ball fields, to keep things flowing the way they should be, that if we could do it for a reasonable amount, it would make sense to do it. But if we didn't, we wouldn't do that part of the project. The two things that I want to say is that installing the curbing in that area, in the north access road, really takes that water and sends it around the ball fields in a way that is really improve the drainage in the whole site. Also, the work that we do in-house in that retention, and then also we've done other grading work in the areas on the south side of the ball field that really helps us control the flow of that water. And we really feel that the best ROI would be for the two crossings that are currently undersized. So knowing that those are the two that really have issues now, we don't feel that that one on the north side, that there's a good enough return on the investment to redo that entire crossing. With that, we do recommend tonight awarding of that contract to Primary Construction for just the base bid for $342,812.12 with a 5% owner's contingency. And we will bring it back without any questions or objections in 2 weeks for final approval, unless you have any questions for me tonight.
Any questions?
One question. When they start the project, will it impede any of the parking on the north side or the driveway that allows people to get to the equestrian parking area?
No, it shouldn't. There should be no impact to the fields themselves or access to the park itself. We'll have, material staged throughout the park, but we'll make sure that we keep roadways and parking open.
Thank you.
Your Honor.
Yes.
If you can swing back a couple to the fields, that's fine.
Yep.
That or the other one. This is just curiosity factor. Over here on the west parking lot, is that a result of like after a rain? Is that dirt on the parking lot right there, or is that just a camera?
No, that is dirt. So the median kind of that separates the two parking areas is all dirt. So anytime there's wind, rain, it just becomes a maintenance issue where we got to go in there and clean that up.
Okay, so it's not coming from the desert from.
No, it's all of that median is all just dirt.
So if you would swing back one more page, that's a lot of dirt.
That one actually is from rain. So
okay.
that one is.
So
from
now
rain.
let's get back to this drainage problem. Would this situation be fixed?
So we feel that that's already been fixed with the curbing that we've put in on the north.
So this is relatively old?
This is an older photo, Google Earth, several years ago. Okay. So since we've put that curbing in and we have had a little bit of rain in the meantime, it is not a problem. Now it comes around basically the same way the road does. So north to south, it doesn't run across that open dirt area and create the flow like it did previously.
Perfect, thank you.
Your Honor.
Yes.
I have a question that I'm asking for you to educate me a little bit, because I'm not really sure if I never picked up on this before, but if we have this whenever, however often, this water problem, and you're channeling it away, why are we not channeling it to over here and making use to water our grass? I mean, why channel it? Where does it go? And we just don't make use of the water that's given to us.
So part of that is, there's a lot to kind of unpack with that. It's a great idea, but a lot of that water comes out of the desert, and when it does come, it brings dirt, rocks, all of that with it. To keep it off of, if we were to just let that run through the ball field, and that's kind of what we have in the past, is that it brings all of that dirt, all that silt, and it just deposits it right on the ball field. So then our parks team spends sometimes days in there cleaning out mud and silt and debris off the ball fields to get them back to usable condition. I mean, there are options to store rainwater. I mean, that's a lot of engineering that I'm not quite qualified to to really get into.
I was just curious.
Yeah, there's possibilities of storing stormwater runoff, but it's just it takes a lot to get into all of that.
Anyone else? Bambi, do you have a question?
No, I think that explained quite a bit. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, thank you very much.
Very good, thank you.
We'll see you in a couple of weeks. Okay. Discussion on proposed lengthening term office of the mayor to 4 years. I've asked this one to be brought up, and the aspect is, really and truthfully, with us mayors being, I'm going to say, be up for re-election every 2 years, I'm going to relate it to, like, right now, if I was going to run again. Really, in about 8 to 9 months, I'd be going out and getting signatures again, trying to get back on the ballot to run. And in a year and 7 months is when the election is. So really and truthfully, it's a very short period of time that you're not, I'm going to say, concentrating on what you need to do to be reelected. A lot of the cities around us, Queen Creek, Gilbert, Mesa, I think Chandler is also, are all 4-year mayor elections. And it is something that, it allows you to really and truthfully be heavily involved in representing the community in it, where you're not wrapped up also trying to run for re-election again. It is I'm going to say, severe, I'm going to say, it is a hassle in the aspect on it, but it is something that I'm think draws the mayor away from his abilities to also be representing the city in a lot of activities in and around the state during these period of times when he's concentrating on running for re-election again. And I know that we have to pass this on to the voters. It's something that needs to be addressed, but I'd like the rest of the council's ideas on this, what I had suggested.
Mayor?
Yes.
I'll go first. This, to me, is a no-brainer. Again, the mayor, every 2 years, you're constantly running. We need stability. The mayor is the face of the city. He or she is the person that goes out and is always there at all the community events and all the other events. And it would be nice to have some stability in the mayor's spot. I don't know why we only had 2 years, if it was for whatever reason, but if you get a mayor and you don't like what the mayor is doing, there are ways to get rid of a mayor. It's called a recall. And I think this would give us a lot more stability, and it would make it a lot nicer for anybody who wanted to be mayor, so they're not constantly, like the mayor said, running almost continuously to keep their spot. They get a very short period of time, and then they gotta start campaigning again. All of council has 4 years. Almost all the cities I know of in the valley have 4-year terms. So I think it is time that we go with a 4-year term for our mayor, whoever that might be.
Yes.
I agree. We need a mayor who's spending his time promoting the city, not constantly politicking and running for office. That's just a waste of time.
Yes.
Well, to play the devil's advocate a little bit, I feel like if any council member that's on the opposite cycle would have to resign their seat if they ever chose to be mayor. So you'd always have 3 council members that would have to quit their job in order to run for mayor. The points that Brian made and Tess made and Chip made, I mean, they're legitimate points. They are, because God, for the past 10 years, I've run every 4 years, and it's not fun to do. I can only imagine having to do it every 16 months. Right, so it's definitely a weight on you to always have to, hey, when am I gonna start again? So if like this mayor and council get past the idea that, okay, if someone, I was discussing this with someone just earlier, and there has been people on our council over the years that have resigned to run for different positions, not necessarily the mayor, but whether it's a representative or a justice of the peace, and it worked. You know, it worked for them. Now, of course, the mayor, when you do this, if someone decided to run, that would show a little dedication, that would show that they're serious, that would show that they're ready to take on the responsibility and they're willing to give up the last 2 years of their council seat, which could be a good thing if someone actually did this. And then there's also the whole idea behind well, the best way I could think about putting it is that although those 3 people may be kind of, you know, tethered a little bit by their terms, it could also be a really good thing. And then the council, of course, would have to appoint somebody if they were to resign to run for mayor. So there's a lot of different things to look at, but I think overall, it's not a terrible idea to look into this. And since I'm assuming this does have to go to the voters, Joe?
Yes, Mr. Vice Mayor.
So, I mean, at the end of the day, it doesn't hurt what you put on the ballot, because it's always up to the people whether they want it or not, right? So if you want to throw something against the wall, see if it sticks, why not?
Not much more to say on this matter, I guess. Having just gone through the campaign process, if I had to do that every 2 years, I'd be ripping my hair out. It is very challenging. Yeah, see, he went through one. So I just would, it's very challenging. And to the mayor's credit, he is at every event, anywhere in this city and even beyond. And to think that he might get pulled away from that because he's got to go out and get signatures, and he's got to be at places to get those signatures or to go campaign, I think that's distracting him from, or the mayor position from what we really need from the mayor. And so I do understand what the issue Robert proposed, but I think if a person believes that they have the skills, they have the desire to become the mayor of Apache Junction, they're willing to take that risk, resign their seat on city council, and pursue that. So I would be in favor of extending that to 4 years.
I guess I have a good question. Maybe it's not good, maybe it's not. If, let's say Peter and I decide to run for mayor. Well, no, I can't use me because he's not on the same cycle I am.
Let's just pretend he's
So let's say he was, all right, and, hey, now we have 2 seats that are gonna be open. They get elected, there wouldn't be an appointment for those seats. Those seats would get filled because there'd be an election for those seats, correct?
No, if you vacate the seat, for whatever reason, and it's before the end of the term, it depends on the timing, of course, but generally speaking, the council would appoint for the rest of the term of those positions.
And those appointments would have to occur fairly quickly, like we did the last time.
Yes.
Hence, how
There have
Peter
been some-
and Bambi were appointed to fill those positions, not after the election occurred, but before the elections were.
Yes. Now,
held.
some cities can't come to a conclusion on who to appoint, so, and there's no
I guess-
penalty if that doesn't happen, but.
Mayor?
I guess the question I would, ultimately getting to is, could myself or Peter get reappointed if we lost?
Yes. If you lost after the election, yes.
But that would, sorry, Joe. That would, so let's say you decide, you gotta resign when you turn in your signatures, correct? When you say this is legitimate, I collected my signatures, I'm turning this in, and that's in like April. And then the election's not till November, so there'd have to be an appointment, correct, between your resigning the seat and that seat in April? Or
It'd be the primary.
I got a legal question.
in August, right?
Yes.
Can we change something where we can stay on council until the election?
No, that's considered violation of state law.
Okay, is there a state law on that? I didn't know.
This is covered by state law.
Okay.
Another question for you to consider, if I may, when we need a direction to staff, not tonight. I think that'd be in 2 weeks, right, Brent?
Your Honor, I'm sensing that you're all kind of, I just didn't know where you would be on it, and if it was quick enough, we could come in 2 weeks. Yeah, we need a direction to staff, so I just didn't know when that would be, but it looks like we are headed towards a direction to staff. Once we get that, Joel, then we do what?
Then you would you'd have to have a resolution ordering a special election. So when can a special election be done? That's a question. Well, can't be done in March, that's too soon. The county has certain deadlines. The city clerk can probably tell you, she's already responded to the inquiry on whether we're going to have an election. Was it August, Evie? So you've already said no to August, correct? And they have a certain amount of time that they have to have an answer. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay.
Did she say no?
So now we're talking November. So what would happen if we do it in November? Well, you have to do 2 resolutions approving the publicity pamphlet, the question that's going to go to the voters, because you have to ask for a proposition that goes on the ballot. And there's 2 counties, don't forget. There's Pinal County and Maricopa County. You have to have elections for both. Even though Maricopa County is so small, you still have to do both. So you've got to have those elections, and say it is on December, I think it's November 4th. You have to canvass the results. That takes a bit of time, especially if the county screws up I shouldn't have said that. I'm sorry. If something happened to the election. Go ahead.
Yes.
Well, I was just going to say this, Joel's getting into a lot of the detail. My take would be, we really set the agenda for February 18th in basically 3 days. And so if you could give us a month to come back and we could set up a real orientation for you that could talk about that, maybe it's a month from now on March 4th to bring back a little bit more of a discussion, or 3rd and 4th, maybe another work session. Then we could outline it so you can see it, and then we could do a direction to staff to then go forward.
So you don't need a direction to staff tonight?
No, you can't have one
Can't.
tonight. You can't vote
Can't we
tonight.
tomorrow?
But I just want to point out that even if you go in November, maybe that's enough time for the next election cycle. But maybe it's not, depending on how much time you need before the petition process starts. So that's something I do need to look into. And if that's the case, then it would go to the next election cycle after that, where the 4-year term would start.
So that's when, I guess, my question would be, if we were to start this process, get the ball rolling this month, would this measure be on the 26 or 28 ballot?
Well, you need to have it on the 25 ballot in this
Well, for-
November.
If you got it on for the 25, I think he's saying that it would be on for the 26th.
I'm
26.
hoping it would be. We'd have to check the numbers that,
You're
you have to
talking
get.
about a special election?
Absolutely, yeah.
You
Now,
couldn't
unless
just-
you say,
just
you
couldn't
know.
do this on an election cycle, just to,
Still be a special.
No, yeah, unless you say, you know what, put it on the next election where candidates are elected. You could do that too, but then that puts off the 4 years for basically another time period. So it wouldn't be this next election cycle. That's what I'm getting at.
So we need to do it this pretty quick here.
Yes, but we do need to get more information. The city manager is correct. Evie needs to contact the counties to find out what kind of lead time they need, because they've already told us, hey, if you don't tell us that you need an election for March or August,
So 1 month, you're good to come back?
I could come back anytime. You could do a special meeting too if you wanted to. But my point is, I don't know for sure if there's enough lead time to make it to the next election cycle. I think there is.
Your Honor. Your Honor.
Yes.
Because I strongly believe that the 4 years makes more sense for the mayor's position, I would really like to see our city staff figure out this timeline as quickly as possible. And if we need to come back for a special meeting, executive, whatever it takes to get a better feel for what this timeline is so we can actually see it.
I agree.
Yeah, I see agreements up here.
Okay. We'll get it ready.
Okay. Well, I thank you. I will adjourn this meeting. Thank you.